I told y'all that Jax was the ringleader. I told y'all. He sat in this interview and he was telling stories about shit that he wasn't even there to witness. So let's break down some of the stuff that I heard in this interview. Let's start with Warren's first phone call, because y'all will remember that Warren said that he was over at Ava's house for that 4th of July party when they all started realizing that Nolan was missing, and he called Miss Christine at 11 o'clock.
One of the first things I told Miss Christine Wells in the first phone call that ever occurred with anything to do with Nolan Wells being gone, because I was the first person to call Miss Christine about anything. First phone call, anything to do with Nolan Wells, was me making a phone call to Christine Wells. And one of the first things I said to her, with multiple witnesses here, pull up the phone call if you want. She said, oh, well, Nolan's location is with y'all at, where the house we were at. And I was like, well, no, he left his phone with us. I told her this.
And yesterday, the same time that this interview came out, Christine Wells said this.
360 says that he's on land, and he was like, well, no, I mean, well, we have his phone.
At around 4 o'clock that afternoon, someone aboard the boat radioed for help. Our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can y'all please come? It was a short call about a boat in trouble, not a report about a missing person. Within minutes, Cito was told the situation had changed. They were told the boat no longer needed assistance because help had already been arranged. By around 4:30, the boat was reportedly back on its way toward the mainland. On paper, that afternoon looked almost uneventful. But Nolan Wells wasn't on that boat, and weeks later, that same distress call became one of the most debated pieces of evidence online. One theory claimed the call wasn't actually made to a private towing company. Some insisted it was the Coast Guard. Another theory claimed the boat was secretly connected to a second, unnamed vessel. And some suggested the decision to end the call was an attempt to hide something. But when those claims are compared with the available records, the picture changes. The call was not to the Coast Guard. It was to Cito, a private marine towing company. And it happened hours before anyone knew Nolan was missing. According to Cito's explanation, the assistance was canceled because other help had already been arranged. There is no confirmed evidence in those records proving the existence of a hidden second boat. That distinction matters, because a theory doesn't have to survive contact with the paperwork to spread online. It only has to sound believable enough for someone to share it. Nolan's mother wouldn't learn that something was wrong for another 6.5 hours. Just after 11 o'clock that night, her phone rang. A friend of Nolan's was calling. She was told Nolan hadn't returned with the others. He had apparently decided to stay behind on the island. The plan, she was told, was for him to catch a ride with someone else later. But getting anyone to officially investigate what had happened took even longer. According to his mother's account, she was passed between 3 different agencies before anyone took action. Part of the problem appeared to be jurisdiction. Horn Island sits offshore, far enough away to create confusion over who should take responsibility. And somewhere inside those 8 hours, between a boat distress call that initially seemed insignificant and the phone call that changed everything, the real story begins. This documentary examines the theories surrounding Nolan Wells' case, including the claims that have attracted millions of views online. We're going to compare those claims with the available call records, GPS data, and official department paperwork. The goal is simple: to separate what can actually be supported from what only sounds convincing. Because in a case like this, those two things are not always the same. Before we continue, if you're new here, this is where we stay with cases like this one. Not until the headlines disappear, but until the unanswered questions are finally addressed. So subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've been following this case with us since July, let us know that too. There are more people watching this investigation than you might think. Now, let's go back to the beginning. 3 o'clock that afternoon. The beach. The last time anyone says they saw Nolan. And while Warren was still on the phone with her, Christine Wells was already doing something he apparently wasn't. She was trying to find her son.
Let's start with Warren's first phone call, because y'all will remember that Warren said that he was over at Ava's house for that 4th of July party when they all started realizing that Nolan was missing, and he called Miss Christine at 11 o'clock.
One of the first things I told Miss Christine Wells in the first phone call that ever occurred with anything to do with Nolan Wells being gone, because I was the first person to call Miss Christine about anything. First phone call, anything to do with Nolan Wells, was me making a phone call to Christine Wells. And one of the first things I said to her, with multiple witnesses here, pull up the phone call if you want. She said, oh, well, Nolan's location is with y'all at, where the house we were at. And I was like, well, no, he left his phone with us. I told her this.
And yesterday, the same time that this interview came out, Christine Wells said this.
360 says that he's on land, and he was like, well, no, I mean, well, we have his phone.
So both versions of the story say that Warren didn't tell her about the phone until after she confronted him with the 360. Now, Warren tells Miss Christine that he knows somebody in the Coast Guard and that he's going to call them, which is very fucking different than calling the Coast Guard, which absolutely explains why the Coast Guard came out and said at first that they had not received a call from the kids that night. The Coast Guard's initial statement said they weren't informed until 12:30. Then the Coast Guard later changed their story and said, oh wait, actually we did. And it seems to me that that first call was most likely an off-the-record to a friend kind of deal, which means these people freaked out and didn't call the Coast Guard until after all these people showed up at Jax's house. Which would explain why in the course of this interview it went from Warren called the Coast Guard to we did. Now, when the subject turns to how the family got the phone back from these boys, you'll notice that there was a couple slip-ups.
Warren, you weren't at the house, and so you weren't there when they came to get the phone and all that. So
now remember, Warren just said that he wasn't at the house when the phone was got. And then Morgan talks about getting a phone call from one of the people in Christine Wells' group.
And how did they get the phone back?
So I got a call from a kid we went to high school with. He called me just asking me questions. He saw people posting on Snapchat, like the picture that was circulating.
Except this picture wasn't posted until July 5th. So how could this picture have been circulating on Snapchat that night? But let's continue.
And he called and he was asking questions. He was like, where's Nolan? When's the last time y'all seen him? And then he was like, so where are y'all at? And I told him, I said, we're at Jax's house. And then Warren got on the phone, and I don't know.
So they come to my house, right? And they kind of
Hold on, before we get there. Was it confrontational, or was it just just trying to find? It was confrontational already.
Wouldn't y'all agree? He was 110%. He was very confrontational.
And when did was this on the night of the 4th or the next day?
This was the night when this was before they came and got the phone.
So this is the night of the 4th, yes.
You guys are missing a part of the story. How did you get from Ava's house to Jax's house? Because Miss Christine is watching you guys on the Life 360. So suddenly she's seeing the phone leave one location and go to another. Of course I would be upset. And now all of a sudden Warren is there when the phone stuff starts happening? He's listening to the phone call? Now I need y'all to remember that Warren also said that the phone was in his truck on the first conversation, as we have from this report. Meaning if we were to believe Warren that he was not there when everybody showed up looking for the phone at some time in between 11 and 1 a.m., so then that would mean after they heard this angry phone call, Warren gets the phone out of his vehicle and puts it in Jack's house and then leaves.
There's probably like 10, 15 people in my house I don't even know. And they're all up in our faces, going crazy, asking where Nolan is, and we don't know. And finally they get into Wyatt's face, and they're like, where's your boat? Where's the boat at?
Demanding his address.
Demanding his address and stuff like that. And he finally ends up giving it to him.
We give them the phone. They have the phone at this point. Then they get the address to his house. Then they go to his house. And they're searching all over his boat, what I heard and stuff like that. Well, anyways, I don't really know much about that, but they come back to my house at around 1 o'clock in the morning. We called law enforcement. I was with Wyatt at the time after we left Jax's house that night. I was with Wyatt, and one person we were with saw that their location was actually headed towards Wyatt's house. And so Wyatt got on the phone with 911 and was like, hey, these people are on the way to my house or already at my house.
my mom and my dad are there alone, and they know nothing about this. But Wyatt's mom actually, when they were looking at the boat, they were actually walking from the boat, and she came out and started talking to them.
Okay, so let me get this straight. Wyatt, Morgan, and Jax were all together. Warren was gone for some reason at this point. 10 to 15 people just barge into your house. Don't know why your grandparents weren't around. That might explain some things, huh? Guess y'all had the house all to your fucking self that weekend. But then they ask Wyatt for his address so that they can go look at the boat. Wyatt gives them the address. They start heading over there. Wyatt and Morgan get into a car and leave Jax's house. Somebody else that you were with that we aren't hearing about is tracking someone else's phone. I don't know if it was somebody who was with the group that they had access to, or if they were tracking Nolan's phone and they saw it was heading to Wyatt's house. And even though Wyatt gave them the address, and instead of calling his parents, he calls 911 and tells them, my parents don't know anything about that's going on. Can you send police over there? Now, mind you, it was about half an hour after being on the phone with Warren that Christine was able to actually call and report him missing. But she was having to go back and forth and go down to all these different agencies because nobody would fucking help her. And frankly, I want to know why all of this confrontation was left out of the fucking report. Like, if this family had to be removed from 2 different properties by the police, why is there no record of that? And in fact, it wasn't until after these confrontations that MDMR and Ocean Springs Police apparently had their little conversations about who was going to be taking over the case. Because remember, the Jackson County Sheriff Lieutenant told them that deputies had spoken with several friends that had traveled to the island on the vessel with Nolan, and that when they were left, he was in the company of an unknown female. So now, even though Warren had supposedly called the Coast Guard, all these family members are telling the police that the kid is missing. These are the people that last saw them. They're all like, we last saw him on the island. Still, the deputies said that they did not have reason to believe that there was any water-related exigencies or emergencies. Don't worry, y'all. I've got a lot fucking more to say about this stuff, so come back for part 2. I'm gonna be immediately recording it because Warren fucked up pretty badly in this interview, and I'll show you why. Where we had left off, Warren had already called Miss Christine, and then they somehow ended up at Jax's grandparents' house. That's where they all stayed that weekend, and so that's why Nolan's keys were over there. They had to have been at the grandparents' house, who mysteriously never showed up during any of these confrontations. Somehow the phone had gone from the party that they were all at to Jax's place, and then Warren left after a phone call to Morgan. According to them, 10 to 15 people showed up and just walked into Jax's house and demanded the phone. Wyatt gave the address in which the boat was at. They all start migrating over there. Then Morgan and Wyatt and another friend are tracking their 360s and seeing that they're going over to Wyatt's house. Then they call 911 to tell them that the police are on the way to his house. Then they're searching the boat, and then they come back to Jax's house around 1 o'clock in the morning, according to him. Mind you, that's when they explain to the police about their friend being missing. And so then the report says at 1:38 in the morning, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office say that they spoke to several of the friends that were on the vessel with Nolan, saying that he was in the company of an unknown female. But Morgan, Jax, and Warren all claimed that they did not travel to the island on the same boat as Nolan. So who did they talk to? Because it sounds to me like they had told the police that they were on the same boat as him. Keeping in mind that this is what Warren told Miss Christine.
Named Katie. And so then it turned into, Katie is also missing. No one can find her. And the explanation of no one knows this Katie, like we've never met her.
And Tristan said this.
I was talking on my other buddy's phone, talking to Warren. He was dialing Coast Guard because he hung up the phone and was like, hey, this is them, and hung up the phone. And that was the last time I talked to him.
Mind you, Tristan is friends with Katie. They are mutuals. I have confirmed this. So now that we've got that timeline fucking straight, let's back up to something that Warren said during this interview.
If you're motivated enough to do it, yeah. Like, I made a phone call to my mom, and I had to call her like 8 times before she picked up because either her service was bad because she was on the back side of the aisle on the south side, or my service was bad, and it was just hard to get through.
Do y'all see that? Let me play it again slower for you.
Either her service was bad because she was on the back side of the aisle on the south side, or my service was bad, and it was just hard to get through.
Oh no. Not only did Warren confirm that his mom was on the south side of the island, but Warren himself said that if you're motivated enough, you can call somebody. I tried calling my mom 8 times. Yet this is what he said last time.
A little off the island.
you have cell coverage. And even on the island, like I called my mom when we were on the island, you know, it was fine.
So which is it? Did you call your mom with ease, or did you try to call her 8 times because you were motivated to get in touch with her? But Warren wasn't the only one to slip up, because listen.
And he's on the phone with Cito, and he's trying to get them on the phone. And as he stated in the moment, he's like, Cito's just asking all these dumb questions. I can't figure out what's going on. And so finally he hangs up, and after the trim to the motor started to work again. So they manually trim it down by the buttons on the motor, trimmed it down, and some electronics started to come back on, and they got the boat to crank over, and they're like, all right, untie us.
So first off, Jax just proved that the boys put the phone on mute during the call with Cito, because I've listened to the entire 8-minute call, and at no point does they ever say anything about them asking all these stupid questions. Then he said after they hung up on the Cito, that's when it started working again, and they said, okay, untie us, implying that it had been tied up to the other boat the entire time. But we see in this video that they are hauling the line back in right here as he's on the phone. See, you can see right here where the line is being pulled in from across the way where the boat is stationed. Meaning he had already hung up with Cito at that point, and he had to have been on the phone with someone else. And what we see here is, once again, we have an interview where they go into so much detail about stuff that doesn't fucking matter.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and first off explain a boat.
We fucking get how a bilge pump works. We get it by now. Stop fucking talking about the bilge pump. What we actually want to hear about is the multiple stops that were made before ending up back at the grandparents' house before they even took the boat to the boat dock. We want you guys to explain how the Cito was canceled by the grandfather on the captain's private line before you guys had even hung up with Cito. That's why nobody believes a fucking word that you are saying. Because I showed y'all yesterday how AI had clearly doctored these photos. If you missed it, look, silver pole. Look, no silver pole. It's actually white. And if you look at this picture in the grandparents' driveway of the Triton, you will see that the little handrails are not leaning over. You will see that the rails are going straight up and down and not leaning, which is why I also suspect that the identity of whoever this is was intentionally covered up. Because first off, who wears this weird swimsuit thing? This is somebody who, if they were with them, would have stood out in a crowd. But this woman who's in a red striped swimsuit with a white baseball cap shows up in a lot of different pictures, just oh so obscured. Here she is again, handing out beers on Bart's boat. So I personally suspect that whoever that was in fact on the Triton, and they used AI to change her clothing and to obscure her identity. Because I think this was either Warren's mother or Wyatt's stepmother, which would explain the older female voice people have said they've heard on the Cito. Because otherwise, why would he need to call his mother 8 times? Unless, according to his own words,
If you're motivated enough to do it, yeah.
because remember, there is a 4th boat out there. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Holy fuck, I just accidentally stumbled onto something that literally is concrete proof. Oh my god, next video coming. Oh my god!
Christine called a family friend, a woman named Toshima, whose 2 sons had grown up alongside Nolan. Within minutes, they were checking 2 different tracking systems, and the results were completely different. Snapchat still placed Nolan on the island, but Life 360, the tracking app connected to Nolan's own phone, showed the device somewhere back on the mainland. 2 apps, 2 locations, and neither answer matched what Christine was being told. She immediately sent her friend toward the location Life 360 was showing. At the same time, Nolan's father, Elmore, went to the house where Nolan had stayed before the trip. He was searching for his son's keys. At first, the family was told the keys weren't there. Later, they were found sitting on top of an Xbox. Nolan's phone eventually returned with the other boys. That part isn't disputed. But what happened to the phone's data became another major question. Online investigators have attempted to reconstruct the phone's movements that night, house by house, minute by minute. But that detailed reconstruction has never been independently verified. What Christine says she discovered herself was much simpler. When she examined Nolan's phone, both of his Snapchat accounts were empty. These were accounts he used regularly, accounts that normally contained videos and updates whenever he spent time with friends. But now, nothing. Christine says she immediately thought something was wrong. Warren Hudson has publicly denied that anyone accessed or deleted anything from Nolan's phone. There is no publicly established evidence proving either version. But the family didn't stop there. About 3 weeks later, their attorneys went to court. They requested subpoenas for Snapchat, Life 360, and 4 additional platforms. They wanted the complete account histories, including timestamps. That move showed something important. The family wasn't prepared to accept a single explanation. They wanted the digital evidence for themselves. And that brings us back to the question raised on the very first night. If 2 tracking applications can place the same phone in 2 different locations, what else about that night might not be as straightforward as it first appeared? The search for Nolan also became complicated by questions of jurisdiction. Christine reported her son missing to the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources at 11:49 that night. She was then directed to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. The Coast Guard was also notified, according to records released later. 3 agencies, 1 missing teenager, and an offshore island where jurisdiction wasn't immediately clear. Christine has described being passed from one agency to another before Jackson County finally opened a report. Later that night, Nolan's parents met with a deputy in a McDonald's parking lot. They explained everything they knew. What followed was a massive search operation. Jackson County deputies participated. The Coast Guard joined in. So did the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the National Park Service, Wildlife and Fisheries, the Biloxi Fire Department, and even the Cajun Navy. All of them were now searching an island that, just 2 days earlier, most people had barely heard of. By the following evening, an MDMR patrol boat was using sonar around the northwest side of Horn Island. But the results were inconclusive. And worsening weather eventually forced the search to stop. Then another detail appeared in the official record. And that detail would become one of the biggest sources of speculation surrounding the case. According to an MDMR police report, several friends who had been with Nolan said that when they left the island, Nolan was with an unidentified woman, and they believed he had chosen to remain behind. That single description, an unknown woman, would become the starting point for countless theories online. But one person who knew Nolan strongly questioned the idea that he would willingly stay behind. Javon Williams, who had seen Nolan on the island that day, told CNN he had never known Nolan to do that. If Nolan arrived somewhere with a group, Javon said Nolan normally left with that same group. Nolan's family remembered him similarly. They had always taught him that when you go somewhere together, you leave together. But neither statement proves what happened. A friend's understanding of Nolan's personality isn't forensic evidence. And an unnamed woman appearing in a police report doesn't automatically indicate anything criminal. What it does show is that there was a documented disagreement over why Nolan remained on the island. The friends who left gave investigators one explanation. They said Nolan wanted to continue talking to a girl. For weeks, that girl was simply described as an unknown female. Eventually, her identity became known. Her name was Katie McCormick. She was 19. And according to her older sister, Gracie, Katie never understood why anyone believed Nolan had stayed behind for her. According to the account given by Warren and his mother, Nolan had supposedly told the group to leave because he wanted to keep talking with Katie. But Katie remembered things differently. She believed Nolan was getting back onto the boat with the others. She had no idea he was staying behind, and she certainly didn't believe he was staying because of her. Her sister said Katie simply assumed the group would never leave Nolan behind. That creates 2 completely different versions of the same short period of time, and both sides have maintained their accounts. Ben Crump, representing Nolan's family, summarized the problem directly. One account says Nolan left with the group. Another says he stayed behind. Both accounts cannot describe the same event accurately. But there is something important that should not be lost in the controversy. Katie has not been accused of wrongdoing. Neither Nolan's family nor investigators have publicly accused her of causing his death. His family has even said publicly that they support her. Katie wasn't part of Nolan's group that day. She had arrived with other friends and eventually left the island with her brother and his fiancé. When people began discussing her online, she gave only a brief public response, saying she was praying for healing and that the entire situation was heartbreaking. So this isn't a story about proving Katie lied. It's about recognizing that two accounts of the same approximately 20-minute period do not match, and the family still doesn't know which account comes closest to reality. By July 6th, the search had become deeply personal. Nolan's high school football coach was now on a private boat with Nolan's parents. They were searching the water themselves. At times, they coordinated with the MDMR patrol boat working nearby. That morning, Christine posted an emotional message. She didn't have a major development to announce. She simply expressed what every parent in her position would have been feeling. She wrote about the unanswered questions, the heartbreak, and the hope that Nolan would somehow walk back through the door. Then, only hours later, that hope disappeared. Around 8:45 that morning, a National Park Service ranger discovered a body in the water near the northwest end of Horn Island. It was the same general area where the MDMR patrol boat had been searching. The Jackson County coroner said there was no reason at that point to believe the body wasn't Nolan. DNA testing would later provide formal confirmation. Sheriff John Ledbetter initially told reporters that there were no obvious signs of foul play. Drowning was suspected, but that was only the initial assessment. It wasn't the final determination. And the exact cause of Nolan's death would remain unresolved for weeks. And, based on the information available, it remains unresolved. What was never uncertain was the impact Nolan had on the people around him. His football coach at Ocean Springs High School, Jake Bramlett, described him as humble, respectful, hard-working, and someone who led through his actions. His principal remembered him as an outstanding student and an important part of the school community. Nolan Xavier Wells was only 18. After days of searching, his family finally knew where he was, but they still didn't know how he got there, and that distinction would become the central issue of everything that followed. The state conducted its autopsy first. That examination took place on July 7th through the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office. Because the cause of death had not been established, the results were expected to remain confidential until the grand jury process. That meant Nolan's family was left with very few answers, so they arranged for another examination. This time, the examination was conducted independently by forensic pathologist Dr. Roger Mitchell, but there was an important limitation. By the time Mitchell examined Nolan's remains, several days had passed since the state's autopsy, and the state had retained important portions of Nolan's neck. That included the trachea and hyoid bone. His organs had also already been examined. As a result, Mitchell could not independently inspect some of the structures that might have helped determine whether drowning occurred or exactly how it happened. So what did the independent examination actually reveal? Mitchell did not identify lacerations. He did not identify skull fractures. And he did not identify deep tissue injuries that he could conclusively attribute to trauma. But there was another issue. Because important neck tissue was unavailable, Mitchell said he could not completely exclude a neck injury as a possible contributor to Nolan's death. His conclusion was not that Nolan had suffered such an injury. The conclusion was that the available evidence was insufficient to rule it out. The cause and manner of death remained undetermined pending further investigation. Then came one particular finding that attracted enormous attention. There was an area of red discoloration in the soft tissue near the back of Nolan's head. Dr. Kendall Von Crowns, an outside medical examiner who wasn't involved in the case, discussed the possible meaning of that finding. He said it could be related to normal changes after death. But he also said blunt force trauma could potentially produce a similar appearance. The available evidence couldn't establish which explanation was correct. Mississippi Public Safety Commissioner Sean Tyndall reviewed the same report. His interpretation was different. He said he saw no evidence of trauma in the report. Two people, one report, two interpretations. That does not automatically mean someone is lying. It illustrates how an ambiguous finding can be interpreted differently. And there is one fact that remains difficult to dispute. Nearly 7 weeks after Nolan's death, there was still no publicly confirmed explanation for exactly how he died. Meanwhile, other parts of the investigation were moving forward. The state's autopsy had been completed. Once the broader investigation concludes, the findings are expected to be presented to a grand jury. That grand jury will determine whether criminal charges should be brought. One attorney involved with the case estimated that process could occur within roughly a month. But the public may not immediately see those findings. The grand jury process could keep much of the information confidential. While the investigation continued, something else began happening. People connected to the case started receiving threats. By early August, 3 separate individuals had reportedly been charged over threats involving people connected to Nolan's case. One man was accused of threatening 2 witnesses and their families. Another was arrested after allegedly threatening a sitting judge through social media. That judge was reportedly the mother of one of Nolan's friends. A third person allegedly made bomb threats against 2 government offices in a single afternoon. These were no longer simply internet arguments. They had become criminal cases, and because of the online attention surrounding Nolan's death, several of his friends began hiring attorneys. Some were preparing for possible defamation lawsuits against people who had publicly accused them online. The conflict even moved in the opposite direction. On the day of Nolan's funeral, attorneys representing his family reportedly sent formal notices to several friends and their families. The notices indicated that litigation could be forthcoming. At the same time, national attention continued growing. The Congressional Black Caucus formally requested that the U.S. Attorney General and FBI Director review the investigation at the federal level. And then came August 19th. The date Nolan would have turned 19. His mother expressed the pain of reaching another birthday without her son. Most parents can call their children, hug them, and celebrate another year. She no longer has that opportunity. A vigil was planned in Biloxi. Ben Crump called for a day of prayer. But regardless of what eventually comes from the grand jury, and regardless of what future testing may reveal, nothing changes the loss already experienced by Nolan's family. And then, there is another name that keeps appearing throughout this story. Bart Edmiston Jr. Bart was 21. He was a punter at the University of Wyoming. He had also played football with Nolan at Ocean Springs High School, and Bart was on Horn Island that July 4th. According to his family, he became involved when another boat nearby experienced trouble. Its bilge pump had reportedly stopped working. Bart's family says he came alongside the boat and helped tow it. That's the documented role attributed to him. He helped another boat that was experiencing mechanical trouble. But online, that simple event became something much larger. It began with an old photograph. The picture showed Bart with a young woman. Some people online claimed that woman was Katie McCormick. If that had been true, it could have suggested a connection between Bart and Katie. But the woman in the photograph was not Katie. Bart's attorney says Bart didn't know Katie before her name became connected to the case. Then came another claim. Some people listening to the CTOW recording believed they could hear Bart's name in the background. Others began examining GPS information. That led to questions about who had actually been operating his boat. Bart's family has maintained that he personally drove the boat to Horn Island, and personally drove it home. Other witnesses were reportedly able to support that account. Bart also cooperated with investigators. His family says he provided his phone, his boat, his GPS information, and names of potential witnesses. He participated in interviews, and he did so without investigators needing to force him through a warrant. Most importantly, Bart has not been identified publicly as a suspect, but online speculation continued anyway. His family says Bart eventually received a serious death threat. Federal, state, and local authorities became involved. His attorney also accused one prominent online creator of publishing Bart's home address, property information, and workplace details. That led to a cease and desist letter. Bart's family has said additional legal action could follow. They also hired a private investigator to identify other people they believe have defamed Bart. Their attorney's position has remained clear. Bart had nothing to do with Nolan's death. No involvement, no contribution, nothing. In another television interview, the attorney compared the online investigation to a childhood game of Clue, except this time, the accusations involve real people, real families, and potentially permanent consequences. Bart isn't the only person affected. Warren Hudson, who was reportedly on the phone during the CTOW call, has said he avoided Nolan's funeral because he feared for his safety after receiving threats. And that's an important distinction. People may have become suspects in the court of public opinion, but that doesn't mean investigators have identified them as suspects. As things stand, no one discussed in these online theories has been publicly named as a suspect by authorities investigating Nolan's death. So what remains when the rumors are stripped away? The answer is more complicated than the internet would have you believe. A private boat distress call was mistaken by some people for something involving a federal emergency response. A tow line became part of a theory suggesting another hidden boat. But the towing company later provided an ordinary explanation for it. Commentary from a former officer was treated by some viewers as though it were official case evidence. An old photograph was misidentified, and a man who helped tow a disabled boat became the subject of a murder theory. His family is now pursuing legal action over some of those accusations. Meanwhile, law enforcement has also become involved because of threats generated by the online speculation. But none of that means every question has been answered. There are still legitimate questions surrounding Nolan's death. The independent autopsy could not completely exclude the possibility of a neck injury, not because an injury was definitively discovered, but because some of the tissue needed to evaluate that possibility was unavailable. The discoloration at the back of Nolan's head also remains ambiguous. It could have resulted from changes after death, or it could potentially have been related to trauma. The available evidence has not publicly established which explanation is correct. There is also the unresolved timeline. There remains a gap between Nolan's last confirmed sighting and the departure of the boat. And then there are the conflicting accounts surrounding Katie McCormick. Her understanding of those final moments doesn't match the account given by the friends who left Nolan behind. Both versions cannot be completely accurate. Those are the genuine unanswered questions. Not the rumors, not the viral theories, not accusations based on photographs, bracelets, or unclear audio. These are the issues supported by the documented record. And underneath all of it is the most painful fact of the entire case. An 18-year-old lost his life. His mother is still waiting for an explanation. She continues asking questions. She continues speaking about her son. And on the birthday that should have marked Nolan's 19th year, she couldn't call him. At the same time, another family in Wyoming has been forced to protect their son from accusations they say were built from speculation. They are spending money on attorneys and private investigators, not to solve Nolan's death, but to identify people they believe falsely blamed their son. Both realities exist at the same time. That's where the Nolan Wells case stands right now. It isn't a solved mystery. It isn't a proven cover-up. And it isn't a story where every online theory has suddenly become fact. It's a grieving family searching for answers. And other families dealing with consequences created by accusations that may never have been supported by evidence. If the grand jury proceeds as expected, the next major developments should come from the official process. And when those developments arrive, the goal should be simple. Separate what is confirmed from what is claimed. Separate evidence from speculation. And separate genuine unanswered questions from stories created for clicks. Because after everything that has happened, that's what Nolan's case needs most. Not another theory, not another viral accusation, but answers that can actually be proven. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.